Welcome back, everyone. As promised, in this video, I will talk a little bit about Stefan Majumdar's paper published in Human Arenas in 2021. The full title of the paper is When the Curtain Falls: Problems of the Subject and Identity as Psychological Infrastructures Collapse. Okay. The paper is concerned with the process of identification. And we do have a common sense understanding of identification. We are familiar with it when we talk about, or when we think about a child identifying with his father or with his mother. So he's identifying. A boy might identify with a particular toy. Say, this is my toy. And we can sense that the boy's self-conception, the way the child is thinking about himself or herself, is attached now for a while, for some time, with this particular toy that is a favorite. Or a boy might identify with the role of being a policeman in the children's game or in the boy's imagination. Majumdar's paper involves an in-depth look at the process of identification as a process of formation of subjectivity, coming to a form of subjectivity, which is not only in terms of judgment and activity. So our common sense familiarity with identification might be just about, okay, you are already a subject, you're already a person, and then you only come to, the only thing that changes about you is that you come to a kind of judgment about yourself, or you come to engage in some activities. It is more fundamental than that. The subjectivity is formed through that identification. So that process, Majumdar very nicely, correctly analyzes that, unpacks that process in terms of, not only in terms of coming to forms of judgment and forms of activity, but also in terms of affect, emotional investment, energy investment, and ways of later in life, not in early childhood, but later in life, it also involves ways of belonging to elaborate social situations. It's how we belong, how we participate in social situations. So identification is part of that. He takes three concepts from Jacque Lacan, the French psychoanalyst who built on the works of Freud. The first concept is the mirror stage. So we are imagining we're talking about a child around 6 months old. And around this time, the child comes to identify with these visual qualities seen in the mirror. So let's read a little bit about the mirror stage. I'm reading from Majumdar's article. We read, in forming an image of himself through the mirror, however elementary, the infant has come to acknowledge a series of qualities and features that mark him off from the environment. It is essential in addressing this phase of development that Lacan puts special emphasis on the fragmentary nature of the perceived image by the child, owing partly to the relative prematurity of the human organism at birth. End quote. It is important here, as Majumdar points out, that it is not a unified image. It's not one thing. It is incomplete, it's fragmentary, and that, because of its fragmentary nature, because of its incompleteness, it pushes the child forward, or it pulls the child towards completion. In this sense, I'm going back to the paper, quote, in this sense, the infant now possesses an ego as object, an ideal I that, because of its fragmentary and incomplete nature, produces in the subject an impetus towards completion, end quote. Another concept later, this is not, we are getting out of the child development and later in life. Here, Majumdar is talking about Lacan's other concept, jouissance. Jouissance is roughly, you can translate it initially as enjoyment, but that it doesn't do justice to Lacanian theory. That's why people usually keep it in its French form, jouissance. Let's read about this concept. Quote, Lacan offers the concept jouissance as a theoretical development on the notion of drive, Freudian notion of drive, as that which situates drive in the edifice of the subject's trajectory through desires, inclinations, and directions comporting a specific history. Jouissance may be conceptualized as a drive towards the fulfillment of desire which never terminates its end, but rather marks off desire's agentive boundaries within the subject's various futile attempts at its termination. End quote. If you have, for example, identified with being a policeman, being a teacher, being a successful businessman, successful CEO, you are not dealing with concrete goals that you can be done with. These are not discrete one-off goals. They give form. They are aims, general aims that don't lend themselves to easy satisfaction. They are there to give form to your sense of personal biography, your history. Despite failures at being a successful businessman, those failures are still part of that desire, part of that general sense of personal history. And through that, they also give form to your sense of the present moment, because the present moment is embedded in that personal biography, personal history. There is another concept, a third concept from Lacan that Majumdar talks about, draws on, and that is objet, petit. That concept also refers to an enabling cause. It's not something that you get. It's not an object that you get to fulfill your desire. It's an enabling cause and a sustaining cause of desire, something that supports the sustaining and the stability of an identity, and an identity as a goal-driven path through time. Let's read about this again from the article. Quote, "The subject's orientation in the complex of the social world she navigates is the assemblage of the form her drives and desires will assume. The institutional contingencies embodied by the society she happens to live in are secondary to those desires inasmuch as they serve to support, enable, and reinforce their aims. Education as provided by the state permits, for example, at the most fundamental level, the ability of the subject to refine and fix the basic elements of mental life required for functioning within economies broadly defined." Now, because the person needs a stable sense of identity, a sense of identity that is not arbitrary, that is not random, the psychological infrastructure, the cultural, social, institutional infrastructure that supports that sense of identity has to also hide its arbitrary nature. So that's the rest of this passage. We read, "Each pillar of society in which a person has found continuity, inside which desire postulates the constituents of its ongoing aims, is needed to conceal its essentially contingent nature." End quote. If you're totally invested in our identities without any way out of them, without any way out of that investment, any other way of coping without those identity investments, without an ability to survive without them, we are in trouble, because those psychological supports that is outside of us, external to us, in the society, in family, in institutions, it is not guaranteed that they will remain there to support us and these identities that we have formed. Here Majumdar brings Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of bad faith, partly to complete the discussion of identification and partly to offer ways of counteracting that totalizing process of identification. The practical way of talking about not letting that process become totalizing, to completely capture subjectivity. Quote, "We can conceptualize bad faith as a refusal to accept the radical freedom confirmed by transcendence in an existence that is immersed in facticity." End quote. Later we read, quote, "Sartre's subject is radically free from the contingencies that bind identity in its forward march through the complexes of the social, economic, and existential conditions that gave rise to them to begin." At the beginning, these complexes gave rise to this sense of identity. These conditions were the supporting conditions. But Sartre's subject, or the subject according to Sartre, should remain free from them in principle, radically free. Continuing the passage, "When circumstances of crisis upend those infrastructures, the subject who has lost a long-held job, perhaps a system of belief or supreme confidence in the nation state, for example, may respond with distress and anxiety." So it is not falling into bad faith, not completely taking these arbitrary identifications that allows us to not fall completely prey to distress and anxiety when the psychological support external to us is gone. I have to clarify something quick here. Bad faith is not something that we can absolutely and completely avoid. It is a necessary and inevitable part of the process of identity formation, the process of identification and formation of subjectivity. But that doesn't mean that we cannot identify it and to some degree move away from it. So bad faith is not something that is bad that we can completely avoid. It is something that we go through and hopefully overcome. All right, read Majumdar's paper. If you want more detail, let me know if you have any comments or questions. And I look forward to speaking with you in the future, in future videos. Oh, one last note. Don't go to Springer's page and buy the article. First of all, the author doesn't get anything from the money that you pay. Secondly, there are ways of getting the article for free. If there are no other ways that you find, email me. I'll be happy to send you a copy of the article. You can also email the author to let him know that you enjoyed and benefited from the paper as I did, as did I. Okay, take care and till next time.